The book of Esther begins in about 483 BC under the reign of the Persian king Xerxes. This is about 55 years after Cyrus II allowed the Jews to go home to Jerusalem, to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple that Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed about 100 years earlier. The people in Persia are the descendants of those who had been exiled under Nebuchadnezzar. Throughout the years, there has been some controversy about the book of Esther, about its relevancy. Martin Luther wanted to expunge it from the scriptures. He thought it should never have been ratified. John Calvin never wrote a commentary on it and never wrote a sermon. While they may not have appreciated the book, Esther has been one of my favorite books ever since I was a child. A little girl sitting in church, pews getting a little hard, growing weary of counting the bricks, and I would open the book to Esther. I was immediately transported into this opulent court of King Xerxes. The story tells of lavish banquets, palace intrigue. There's humor. There's plot reversals, and there's justice. Justice won out, and the Jews were saved from destruction. It never occurred to me that God was not mentioned. But why would a book in the Bible that never mentions God be included? If he is not mentioned, is he in the book? If he is silent in life, is he present? Where is God in all of this? Our text begins in the middle of the story. We know what comes before, but we don't know what's to come. That's real life, isn't it? We know what's happening now. We know our circumstances in the past, but we don't know what's in our future. And sometimes our future feels very uncertain. Before we jump into the story, let's remember what has already happened. You'll remember King Xerxes threw a lavish banquet for all of his nobility and the military officials, and he summons Queen Vashti to come so he can show off her beauty among all the men. She refuses. So he banishes her from his sight forever. He decreed that. It's mentioned several times that the king's decrees are irrevocable. The king sends commissioned men then throughout the empire, gathering up all the beautiful young virgins to be placed in his harem so he can choose a new queen. A Jewish orphan, Hadassah, better known as Esther, was chosen by the king to be his queen. You'll also remember that Esther's cousin and adoptive father, Mordecai, saved the king from an assassination plot. Then the king promotes Haman to second in command, and he orders that all the royal officials are to bow down to him. Mordecai is a royal official. He sits at the king's gate, which is the entrance to the commerce building, which is attached to the palace. Whenever Haman passes by, all the royal officials immediately bow down. Mordecai alone refuses to bend the knee. When Haman learns of Mordecai's disrespect, he flies into a rage. In retaliation, Haman decides to kill not only Mordecai, but every Jew throughout the whole entire empire. Haman has the lots thrown, and the date for the extermination of the Jews is set. With all these decisions in place, Haman approaches the king. Through lies and half-truths, he manipulates the king to agree with his plan. He convinces the king it is in his best interest to root out and annihilate the people who keep themselves separate, whose customs are different than everyone else's, and who don't obey his laws. To sweeten the pot, and knowing he loves opulence, Haman offers the king 10,000 talents of silver, effectively 1/3 of the royal treasury. The king takes off his ring, hands it over to Haman, giving him complete control, and says, "Keep the money, do with the people as you please." So the royal secretaries write up the decree, and couriers dispatch it throughout the empire. The decree orders the annihilation of the Jews, all of the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day. Chapter 3:15 reads, "Spurred on by the king's command, the couriers went out, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but Susa was bewildered." The New English translation says, "Susa was in an uproar." Let's go to our text, shall we? When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province in which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hatach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hatach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hatach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner courts without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I have been called to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Here ends the reading of God's word. Mordecai's roar of moral outrage is heard throughout the city square. He rends his clothing and he cries out loudly and bitterly in front of the king's gate to all who would hear him. He stands in front of the palace to confront the king about his order to eradicate the Jews. The king is not present. He is not listening. Waves of emotion flood to the forefront. All the generational trauma of the last 100 years being exiled in a strange land. Remembering the pain of God's dwelling place, the temple, being destroyed. Of being driven out of Jerusalem, the city of God. Of being banished from the land and out of God's presence. The powerlessness of the past is overflooding the powerlessness of the present, and Mordecai cries out in anger, agony, "Why? Where are you?" Even as Mordecai is crying out, the news of the edict continues to spread, and the sound of the weeping and the wailing rolls out like a storm across the empire. But Esther, she is sequestered away in the king's palace and hears nothing. She is oblivious of anything being wrong until her attendants come and tell her. The news rocks her. Mordecai was always steady and stable, the unflappable one. It was calm Mordecai that she had always been able to rely on to help her go through all the traumas in her life. His raising her like a daughter when her parents had died. Watching over her, pacing outside the harem where she was to make sure she was okay after she had been snatched from the home. Cautioning her to hide her Jewish identity and still advising her even when she was in the palace. Even when they were separated by walls, he was still very near. He was her rock. But now Esther is in distress. She has never seen her rock crumble like this before. I imagine she feels powerless to help him. So she does the only thing she can think of. She sends him clean clothing to put on. It's her attempt to fix. It's her attempt to console. It's like telling him to stop crying out. Change your clothes, change back to the person you were. But Mordecai wouldn't accept them. This was not the time to keep silent. A back and forth ensues between Esther and Mordecai as they argue with each other via a messenger, Esther's attendant. She orders Haddock to find out what was troubling Mordecai. Mordecai vents and tells him everything that has happened to him and everything that will happen to the Jews, supplying proof as well. Mordecai sends the information back to Esther, instructing her to go to the king and plead for her people. The king was not hearing him, so Mordecai sends Esther to get his attention. Esther is incredulous and reminds Mordecai that anyone who approaches the king without being summoned first faces certain death. That is the law. Only if the king held out the gold scepter would anybody live. Given the present circumstances, the likelihood of him holding out the scepter was slim. There are several barriers Esther needs to hurdle as she approaches the king. Number one, she would be breaking the law by approaching Xerxes without being summoned. Number two, she would have to come out and reveal her identity as a Jew. Not a good climate in which to do that. And number three, she would have to speak up for herself and for her people. Esther has never used her voice. She has just done what she was told. The situation is very dangerous. The future is uncertain. And so Esther digs in her heels and resists Mordecai's instructions. Her feelings of fear and powerlessness have just increased. We are a lot like Esther. We go about our daily lives complacently until something happens that rocks our world. Everything we thought was steady and firm seems to crumble. Chang Li Tao knows this better than most. He was napping peacefully on a Sunday afternoon when his daughter-in-law said that ICE was knocking on his door. He told her not to open it. ICE broke in the door with their guns pointing and started shouting at the family. The Tao told the reporter, "I was shaking. They didn't show any warrant. They just broke down the door." His daughter-in-law attempted to show the ICE officers his ID that proved he was a citizen. They said, "We don't want to see it." Instead, as his 4-year-old grandson is watching and crying, they lead Tao out of his house in nothing but slippers and his underwear and a blanket over his shoulders. Thus wrote the Associated Press reporter. Seeing things like this on the news is rocking our world. It is not just the illegal aliens who are being swept up. It's the legal residents who are being gathered up and deported. Those are seeking asylum are being swept up in raids. And now this? An American citizen? Sometimes we just want to turn off the news and live in our own little bubble. Reduce our anxiety, achieve status. Stasis, it was the word, stasis. We may have that luxury, but those right in the thick of it do not. They see no way forward. They live in fear, feeling powerless and voiceless, afraid to leave their homes. I imagine them crying out in the darkness, "Why? Where are you?" Even as we see these scenes, we have an inner turmoil. We argue with and among ourselves, much like Esther and Mordecai. What good does marching do anyway? I have responsibility, children to care for, bills to pay. I have a church meeting to go to. Perhaps we even argue with God, which, if you really think about, is what inner turmoil is, right? God is trying to tell us to do something. We're resisting and saying, "No, I don't think so." And we start digging in our heels just like Esther. The upshot is we often feel powerless to help or effect change. And sometimes we're just downright scared. And we say, along with the victims, "Why? Where are you?" Tim Waltz said, "This is no longer a political debate. We are having a moral debate." In my ethics class back in seminary, we queried the professor. Why is it that the denomination never makes statements about the prevalent issues in our country? The Pope would. Why don't we? His response was that there's difficult issues, and every individual has to look at their own conscience and decide what they have to do. He said the only time would be if a compelling moral issue arises. Then the church, the denomination, could speak up with one voice. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Mordecai warns Esther she does not have the luxury of remaining silent. Mordecai replies, "Just because you are in the king's palace, don't think you'll survive. For if you remain silent at this time, deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, and you and your family will not survive. You will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Mordecai points out that perhaps all of Esther's past experiences have been preparing her for this moment which she could speak up on behalf of her people. In this story, Mordecai jolts Esther out of her complacency. His actions force her to react and to change. But Esther is still unsure of herself. She is not used to speaking up for herself, let alone others. The situation is reminiscent of Moses and God. Moses telling God, I can't speak, send somebody else. However, as Esther and Mordecai's conversation unfolds throughout this story, she is in fact growing. She's learning to speak up. She became curious. She wanted to know what was bothering Mordecai. Through all the years when others spoke for her or told her what to do, she is finally talking back and saying, "No, I'm not going to do that." She is finally becoming bolder until Mordecai stuns her with the truth about the situation, leaving her at a tipping point. Will she embrace her Jewishness and the covenantal faith of her fathers? Will she speak up for her family and for her people, for the Jews? Or will she choose silence and continue living a life of ease in the Persian palace? When Esther makes her decision to embrace her Jewishness, she breaks out of her shell and begins to grow into the person that God had created her to be. Esther is empowered. In reflecting Joel 2, verse 15, she sounds the trumpet, declaring a holy fast. Esther commands Mordecai to gather all the Jews of Susa together to fast for her. She too would fast for 3 days, day and night. Then, and only then, would she go before the king. And she states, "If I perish, I perish." Those who are marching in Minneapolis have decided, if I perish, I perish. And indeed, some have. Just as Mordecai went to the streets of Susa in protest of an unjust and immoral decree by King Xerxes, so the people of America are rising up to sound the alarm of unjust and immoral actions by ICE in Minneapolis. The United Methodist News reports that on January 23, 50,000 people from across the United States gathered in Minneapolis for a peaceful protest, calling for ICE to clear out. Reverend Mariah Tolgard said, "Friday felt holy, like resurrection morning, like Pentecost fire spreading across the prairie wind. The unity, the singing, the prayers." Chronicles 7:14 says, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear them from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and heal their land." Across America, people are praying. The Spirit of God is sweeping across the land, empowering people to stand up and be the voice for those who have been silenced, to be the agents seeking to right the wrongs for those who have no agency, to be the comforters of the people as they sing, hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. And so strengthen each other with songs of resolve. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I will live for liberation, for I know why I was made. They know their purpose, even as Esther discovered hers. God empowers, then moves his people. Paul Wilson, in his book, Practice Preaching, states, the human action that God requires is the action God empowers. God empowered Joseph, an annoying little brother, and through him it saved the Israelites and other countries from starvation. He empowered Rahab, a prostitute, as he helped the spies escape Jericho, enabling the Israelites to come and overtake Jericho and move into the promised land. He empowered David, whose family was a dysfunctional mess. Through David's lineage, Jesus was born. He empowered Peter, who was a hothead and yet became the pillar of the church. And in real time, we are seeing God empower just regular people en masse to be a voice for justice. All throughout history, God has used his people to fulfill his purposes. He has never been absent. He is always working his purposes out. Esther 5, the rest of the story. Esther 5, verses 1 through 2 reads, on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out the golden scepter to her. So Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. God empowers, and then he paves the way. His purposes will not be thwarted. Through Esther, the Jews of the Persian Empire were saved. It needed to be so, because Christ the King was yet to be born. Christ our King sees you and knows you. He smiles upon you. Our King loves you dearly and is reaching out his scepter, the cross, to you to invite you to come. Draw near. He doesn't command. Rather, gently, he invites you to come to the banquet feast that he has prepared for us at great cost. Will you come?